There was tremendous fear. Was he going to strike again? Nobody knew.
A stranger massacres 9 innocent people.
There is a mother lying in her own son's blood.
My mom loved that church.
The truth is, hate crimes come from quote-unquote normal, everyday people.
He learned his ideology from the internet.
How did the fear and hate lead to unprovoked attacks against innocent people?
He talked about being afraid that Muslims were taking over the government.
The plan was to kill infants, women, children, men.
I think that's something you have to worry about all the time. Like, will people come after me because of the color of my skin?
In-depth, insightful, in a class of its own. It's America's leading journal, Vanity Fair. Reporter Tina Wynn explores racism in America and Dylan Roof's radical white rage. June 17th, 2015. The regular Wednesday evening Bible study is underway in the basement of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, one of the nation's oldest black churches.
Emmanuel was not just any church in town. This church held a special place in the community. There has been a long civil rights involvement at the church, and Dr. King was there in the 60s.
Tonight, the Bible study group has 12 members, mostly middle-aged and older women.
A young white man walked in. He asked for the pastor. They welcomed him into the group. Someone handed him a Bible. He sat down next to Clemente Pinckney, who is the senior pastor of Emmanuel.
They discussed the Bible for a full hour, and according to people at the scene, the young man didn't say anything. He just kind of sat there.
As they were getting ready to go into their closing prayer, he stood, reached into his fanny pack, and pulled out a .45 caliber handgun.
He hesitates for a second.
He said, "For a moment, I didn't want to shoot them because they were so nice to me." And then around 9 p.m., he gets up and starts shooting them. Shooting all of them and saying, "You rape our women, you kill us, you have to die." And people are begging him to stop.
He shot in all 77 times, killed 9 of them.
He actually reloaded his gun 5 times as he murdered these people.
And he walked over to Polly Shepard, who was a 70-year-old woman who was hiding under a table, praying. And she was praying out loud and certain her life was going to end. And he said, "I'm not going to shoot you. I'm going to leave you to tell the story of what I've done."
He wanted somebody to tell the stories of his deeds.
Felicia Sanders, whose 26-year-old son Tywanza has just been killed as he tried to protect the others, manages to survive too.
She had the wherewithal to grab her 11-year-old granddaughter and pull her under a table and tell her to play dead.
There is a mother lying in her own son's blood, and people playing dead so he doesn't shoot them as well. And then he flees.
911, what's the address of the emergency?
Please, Emmanuel Church, there's plenty of people shot down here. Please send somebody right away. There's so many people dead, I think.
Around 9 p.m., disturbing news begins to explode across Twitter.
There had been a shooting at Emmanuel. We didn't know at the time just how severe it was, but the fact that it was at a church downtown obviously was cause for concern.
All of a sudden, the AP comes up with an alert saying, there's a shooting at a historically black church that's really prominent in Charleston, and we don't know who the shooter is.
To authorities, a white man shooting down black worshipers points to one terrible conclusion: a racially motivated hate crime.
He only went to that church because it has a very symbolic meaning to the African American community in Charleston.
It will be investigated as a hate crime, but the FBI would be here regardless because of the size and scope of the investigation.
All he really had in his head was the idea that black people, as he told his victims, are raping our women and taking over.
What could have inspired this young man to commit such a despicable crime? These days, you don't have to look very far to find ideas about degenerate races and religions. The internet brings them right into our homes.
A report out this past week cited what it called a barrage of hate after the election of Donald Trump. The analysis came from the Southern Poverty Law Center, a civil rights group, which cited more than 800 incidents, many of them aimed at African Americans and immigrants.
And hate often translates into action. According to the Department of Justice, more than 250,000 hate crimes take place in the United States each year, 90% violent. The prime targets: African Americans, Muslims, and Jews.
A hate crime is defined in federal law as someone targeting someone because of their race, creed, sexual orientation.
Hate murders have existed since the KKK and continue to this day.
KKK is here to stay!
The KKK was formed after the Civil War by former Confederate officers to keep down freed blacks. It was outlawed after years of violence and terror, only to be revived during World War I, when millions of immigrants, many of them Catholic and Jewish, arrived in America. The KKK once hid behind hoods. Today, many of their descendants feel free to openly express their racist ideology.
America was, until this past generation, a white country, and it belongs to us. Hail Trump! Hail our people! Hail victory!
But one angry man who embraces white supremacy remains in the shadows. A man who commits one of the most deadly hate crimes in modern American history.
Nobody at that time knew who the shooter was or what his intentions were, if he had plans to strike somewhere else in the city.
Police spread out through the city of Charleston, searching for the shooter.
The police helicopter was soon flying overhead. There were police everywhere in the city. Residents near the church received robocalls to stay indoors.
We are following a church shooting in Charleston, South Carolina that occurred about 9 p.m. this evening. The gunman is still at large.
You feel so much shock because you don't want to picture it. And for me, it was just unimaginable because as the names of those who've been killed became public, you realize they're people you knew.
I was saddened not just at the individuals who lost their lives, but they lost it in the context of welcoming someone in to worship with them, and that somehow made it worse. That they'd been open and they paid for it with their lives.
What makes it so heartbreaking is my mom loved that church. It felt like my heart was taken out of my body. I remember getting in the shower with all my clothes on because I couldn't breathe. And
I think the overwhelming sense was if we can't study the Bible and be in a safe space, then where can we feel safe?
There was tremendous fear of whether he would target another black church. Was he going to strike again? Nobody knew.
Fearing the potential for more violence, the Charleston police call in the FBI's Civil Rights Unit. They suspect the shooter may be a member of a neo-Nazi or skinhead group.
The FBI formed a team that could respond to mass casualty events like these and jumped into gear, assisting local law enforcement in setting up groups of investigators.
The city went into overdrive, and started combing surveillance cameras for any sort of footage.
While authorities search for any clue to the shooter's identity and whereabouts, the specter of more violence looms large.
Around 10:30 at night, there was a bomb threat called in that had everybody on edge again.
The police have been continuously moving us back, and an officer just explained why. He said there was a confirmed bomb threat in the nearby area.
The bomb threat was for location near the church. Maybe this was part of a much larger plan. Nobody knew.
The bomb never materializes. The next morning, the police are still in the dark about the killer.
As of the early part of the morning, the shooter was still at large.
Then finally, a lead from the church's security camera.
They found one piece of footage with a young man with a bowl cut leaving the church.
Around 6:30 in the morning, they issued a poster with his image on it that was shared around the world.
And they put out the image on television and said, here's a 1-800 number. Please call us if you recognize this man. And his sister called in and said, I know who that is. That's Dylan Roof.
They have a name, they have a face. Now, law enforcement has to track him down before he kills again. Police have identified Dylan Roof as the prime suspect in the murder of 9 parishioners in a historic black church the night before. Now, they have to find him, fast.
No one knew who he was. No one at all. He was not known to anyone in that community.
Dylan Roof is also unknown to the FBI. He's never been associated with any neo-Nazi or racist group. So, who is Dylan Roof? And where is he now? The police and FBI look hard at his family and acquaintances.
His parents separated before he was even born. Dylan Roof is very much a loner, very, very few friends, obviously confused in a lot of ways.
I would describe him as a troubled kid. The thing is, lots of people come from troubled backgrounds, and their response is not to go commit a racially motivated massacre.
He really seemed to have come out of nowhere. He had black friends, including one who was on TV.
Like, everybody's making him out to be racist, but here I am in front of you today as a black man and telling you I look at him no different today than what I looked at him last week. Because he never said anything racist to me, never treated me any different.
I don't think his white friends shared his sympathies at all. They grew up in racially integrated communities. They had black friends too.
Some of his friends recall hearing Roof's extreme views, but they dismissed it as just crazy talk.
His friends didn't take him seriously, but in the way that if you have a friend who says something crazy, you try to laugh it off because you really don't want to believe that they would do such a thing.
As far as we know, when his friends heard any inkling of his plans, nobody went to police ahead of time.
Pictures of Dylan Roof and a photo of his car are broadcast on TV and circulate on the internet throughout the morning. Yet there hasn't been a single solid lead. Then, 13 hours after the attack, authorities get a break.
He had driven up to the border of North and South Carolina near a town called Shelby, where a woman who was on her way to work spotted the car. She realized who he was.
A policeman gets a call from a friend of his who's a florist, and she says, I think I've seen his car, I think I've seen him, I'm going to tail him for you.
And she wound up following him until the Shelby, North Carolina police arrived.
The police caught up with her, and they eventually caught him.
And one of the concerns for police had been that upon approaching him, he was going to want to go out in a blaze of glory.
And notably, he said he was going to kill himself, but he didn't. He surrendered quite easily.
A few hours after his arrest, 2 FBI agents interrogate Dylan Roof.
You said you had to do this because...
I had to do it because nobody else is going to do it. Nobody else is brave enough to do anything about it. Back in the late 80s and the early 90s, you know, we had skinheads and stuff like that. There's no skinheads left. There's no KKK. KKK never did anything.
So you basically trying to make a statement or prove a point on behalf of the white race, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, in a way.
According to Dylan Roof, the internet transformed him. But why?
This is a true case, apparently, of self-radicalization. Dylan Roof was a kid who was very angry and who got interested in the Trayvon Martin killing in 2012. Martin, of course, was killed by George Zimmerman, and Zimmerman, of course, was not ultimately convicted of any crime. Dylan Roof decided that Trayvon Martin had deserved to die. And thinking about this, he went to the internet and he typed the words "black on white crime" into Google.
Which, in white supremacist circles, is the belief that Black people are targeting white people at alarming rates that society has not really caught on to because they are too timid to acknowledge that Black people are targeting white people.
Roof got all his information from the internet and made his decisions accordingly. Dylan Roof was utterly convinced by this. He adopted the idea that is now very prevalent on the radical right in general, which is that white people in the United States are being subjected to an intentional genocide by Black people and people of color.
The FBI statistics show African Americans to be the most frequent target of bias-motivated hate crimes.
But in your mind, the white race is the dominant race.
No, I don't think the white race is the dominant race. I wish it was, though. You know, I think it should be. That's the problem.
Dylan Roof found the approval he needed on the internet, a place where people with radical ideas can find communities who share them. Authorities want to know, was he acting alone?
There was not evidence of a conspiracy that would bring more violence to the city. Police considered him to be what we call now a lone wolf.
He not only didn't plot with anyone, wasn't financed by anyone, he simply read what he wanted to read, absorbed the racist ideology, and then acted 100% on his own.
Just before the murders, Dylan Roof completed a racist manifesto, which authorities discover online, full of rage about the plight of white people and his hatred for blacks.
Dylan Roof decided, I am going to kill Black people. And at the very end of the manifesto, he actually says quite explicitly, it's all talk, no action, someone's got to do it, it might as well be me.
So Roof, like many hate criminals, decided he had to be the young, noble hero of his community, meaning white people.
I think he really wanted to start a race war. I think he saw himself as a bit of a martyr, and that he was going to be the first one to act on what people on the internet, what all these white supremacists had tried to do for ages and ages and ages.
While Dylan Roof awaits trial, 1,500 miles away in southwestern Kansas, 3 men are suspected of planning to start a war of their own against Muslim immigrants. And according to authorities, they intend to murder men, women, and children to do it. It has been a year and a half since Dylan Roof murdered 9 black parishioners in Charleston. 1,500 miles away, another community is in serious danger, and they have no idea what's about to happen.
When people think of Kansas, they think of farms, they think of predominantly white towns.
Garden City is not a typical Kansas town. They have some of the biggest and best meatpacking plants in the state of Kansas and in the Midwest, and they employ a lot of immigrant labor, Somalis, Burmese.
When refugees are looking for a place to resettle or being invited to a place to resettle, they go where the jobs are. So we have lots of jobs, especially in meat processing.
Mursal Naleye came from Somalia to the United States in 2010 when he was 20 years old. He came by himself to escape the Civil War.
The reason I came down to the United States or left my country is to have a better future, get a good education, help my family, because my country's been civil war since 1990. There's no peaceful, so I just run away to have at least better life and to help my family. All my family back home, I just help them, I support them.
Somali refugees began arriving in Garden City in the mid-1990s. Today, there are about 500 Somalis in a city of roughly 30,000.
They came from very, very bad situations where they had originated. Gunfire, hunger, deprivation, persecution. They came to this country with quite a good work ethic. So that's something that would attract any company looking for workers. They were willing to do the hard labor.
There's quite a few Somali refugees living there in Garden City, and many of them practice the Muslim faith.
In Garden City, you're free to practice any religion. So it's a really good thing to have this town.
But 60 miles south, in the town of Liberal, Kansas, authorities say 3 men, Curtis Allen, 49, Gavin Wright, 49, and Patrick Stein, 47, are on a collision course with the people of Garden City.
These were regular guys, like you might see, working in your community, living in your community.
Gavin Wright runs the family mobile home business. Curtis Allen is ex-military and works with Gavin Wright. Patrick Stein comes from a respected family. All are alleged to have formed an underground group bent on saving America from foreigners.
There was a militia group here in Kansas that called themselves the Crusaders.
These 3 men had been a part of some white nationalist hate organizations. They had on their social media feeds talked about being afraid that Muslims were taking over the government.
These guys referred to Somalis often as cockroaches, like they were nothing, like they weren't, fit to be living in society, fit to be alive.
According to the FBI, Allen, Stein, and Wright have been secretly plotting for months to commit mass murder.
The plan was to kill infants, women, children, men. They wanted to eliminate everyone. They wanted it to be a starting point, a call to action. Patrick Stein had a felony and Curtis Allen had some misdemeanors, but it's really nothing that anybody might expect to see out of an individual who is plotting something like this.
Their hatred makes them so bold. They are suspected of casing potential targets in Garden City in broad daylight.
They've been spending a lot of time in Garden City, driving around, looking, and sometimes rolling down their vehicle window and saying cruel things to people wearing hijabs and dressing differently.
Ultimately, the men zero in on the group's mosque.
The Somalis are very proud of their mosques, so they always want to make sure that they have that place for prayer. It's an apartment, and it's an apartment with no furniture. What would be the living room is full of prayer rugs. Somebody could live in it, but it's just the mosque. So it's all about the prayer.
They were planning the attack at prayer time in the mosque. So people would be praying and there would be the most people there in the apartment complex.
There were kids playing on the pavement, kicking soccer balls around, standing around, small children walking with their parents holding their hands. So you've got 150 people in this apartment complex, including maybe 50, 60 children, and they're gonna blow them up.
Total destruction was the idea, and mass murder.
Three white men who call themselves the Crusaders are accused of planning to blow up an apartment complex and murder dozens of Somali Muslim immigrants, including women and children, in Garden City, Kansas. And they have decided on the date of the attack, November 9th, 2016.
They had planned to detonate these bombs the day after the presidential election.
Those people was planning to do this since February 2016.
Allegedly, their plan is to manufacture the bombs themselves, using store-bought materials such as fertilizer.
There was some discussion that there would be fuel and fertilizer bombs utilized, much like what Timothy McVeigh had used in the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. And their idea was to load 4 vehicles full of bombs and park them around the complex in Garden City.
The men are believed to be seeking illegal explosives for the bombs, as well as fully automatic rifles. They try to maintain secrecy.
They met a couple times sort of out in the field so they wouldn't be heard. It was very secretive.
What Patrick Stein, Curtis Allen, and Gavin Wright don't know is that their every move is being closely tracked by one of their own, a 4th member of the Crusaders.
An individual who was involved in the group got nervous when talk of violence heightened and decided to go to the FBI and disclose his concerns. And the FBI convinced him to be a confidential informant and to allow FBI to conduct surveillance on conversations that he was having with the members of this group.
The FBI informant did a lot of secret recordings of their meetings. They talked about there needing to be a spark, that they need to fight back, that perhaps that this action would lead other people to do other actions.
The FBI informant tells the plotters that he knows someone who can help make the attack happen.
In September, this confidential informant for the FBI introduced Patrick Stein to an undercover FBI agent who was posing as a leader of a criminal organization and who had agreed to provide some bomb-making materials, explosive materials, and firearms. Stein spent some time trying out the firearms that were brought along by the FBI employee. And then Stein actually took the FBI employee to the apartment complex to show him where they planned to detonate this bomb on November 9th. There was a lot of discussion about what would be needed in making the explosives and how much Stein was willing to pay for the bomb as well. Patrick Stein, of course, didn't know that this was an undercover employee for the FBI.
Law enforcement believes the Crusaders are readying themselves and their weapons, waiting for the crucial ingredients from the new supplier. Then, with the 2016 presidential election only 3.5 weeks away, the FBI swoops down and arrests the plotters, uncovering an arsenal of lethal materials.
These guys were stockpiling explosive materials, they were stockpiling ammunition, they were stockpiling firearms, things that they needed to carry out this plot, that they had spent months planning.
They found a metric ton of ammunition in Allen's mobile home. There were bomb materials found at Wright's business, according to the FBI.
America's largest Muslim civil rights group is calling for more security at mosques after the arrest of 3 men in Kansas.
They hate everything. They don't want government, they don't want colors, different colors, they don't want religion. One of them was saying, kill them because the right Muslim is the one dead.
I'm a minority myself, so the idea that someone would come up to me and take my life just because of the color of my skin, knowing nothing about me, they just saw me and said that person needs to die, that is terrifying. But unfortunately for minorities, it's something that's way more real, especially in America, than it is for white people.
We were just thinking that much explosive would have taken out more than just that little area. It would have spread out to blocks. And so I think we were just heartbroken.
And I was shocked and scared. All people leave Garden City get scared and shocked. And I don't really know what I did to those people. And I don't know why they don't just want me to be out there and to have my own life. And I don't really know what is the reason they hate me.
The FBI assures locals that they have arrested all of the plotters. Garden City Chief of Police Michael Utes attempts to reassure the Somali community.
I want to let them know that this was not a threat just against them. This was a threat against Garden City as a whole, and that we weren't going to stand by and let this happen.
The Somali leaders said, well, we came from war and violence, and nobody protected us. We're here in the United States, and this almost happened, but we were protected, and that's why we're here.
The message I wanted to get out was it was safe for them to go to school. It was safe for them to go out and play. It was safe for them to go to work. It's safe for them to stay in Garden City and be part of our community.
The violence in Garden City was averted only because someone learned of the vicious plot and reported it to the FBI. In the Dylan Roof case, his friends heard him making threats, but no one spoke up.
These kind of things can happen anywhere. And honestly, I don't know how to get someone to stop hating. But I think that's the question we're all grappling with right now, especially since we've discovered that a lot of racial motivated hate in America doesn't come from institutions anymore. It comes from people themselves.
Stein, Allen, and Wright remain in a Wichita jail, awaiting trial in federal court. They maintain their innocence.
Patrick Stein, Gavin Wright, and Curtis Allen were charged with conspiring to use a weapon of mass destruction against people and property in the U.S. Basically, that means domestic terrorism. And the presumptive potential penalty for a conviction of that particular crime is life in federal prison.
To law enforcement, the plot in Garden City and the murders in Charleston are disturbing signs of the risks we face in an increasingly complicated world.
Dylan Roof was charged with murders, and he was also charged with hate crimes, which upset a lot of people because people also believed that he was committing a terrorist act.
The vast majority of law enforcement agencies do not give lots of attention to hate crimes, right? I mean, if we're going to pay more attention to it because we call it terrorism, it is a very useful label.
Hate crimes probably could be arguably a much smaller scale version of terrorism, a bit more local, a bit more homegrown, probably executed by a lone wolf, as it was in the Dylan Roof case. I think the line is being blurred.
Whether you call it a hate crime or domestic terrorism, the brutal rampage of Dylan Roof is about to force the people of Charleston to confront their deepest fears. The day after he murdered 9 members of the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, Dylann Roof is captured without a shot fired by police in Shelby, North Carolina. Roof confesses his crime to the FBI interrogators 3 hours after his arrest.
Well, I had to do it because somebody had to do something.
So Dylann Roof was charged with murders, and he was also charged with hate crimes. The community was devastated. They had always been aware that racism was systemic and that was lingering underneath the surface.
You still got that residue of the mentalities of the master and the slave. And unfortunately, we see what has happened here yesterday. That just makes people more aware of it. Like, racism never ended.
People, if they have a racial problem, do not pick up a gun to go out and kill people just because they hate the opposite race or person, another minority.
Hate crimes, and especially hate murders, terrorize the entire community. You cannot leave your race behind. That is very traumatizing.
2 days after the shooting, Dylann Roof has a routine bond hearing via closed circuit. Some family members of the victims decide to go to the court. The judge gives them the opportunity to address Roof.
And there was tremendous tension in the room. This was the first time they had seen him. None of the family members had planned to speak. But when the magistrate began calling out the victims' names, among the first he called out was Ethel Lance, who was a 70-year-old custodian at the church. Well, Ethel Lance's youngest daughter, Nadine Collier, felt moved to stand up and say something.
You took something very precious away from me. I will never talk to her ever again. I will never be able to hold her again. But I forgive you. And have mercy on your soul.
One by one, they got up and said essentially the same thing, and the whole world was watching.
It is unbelievable that these families had that ability to offer forgiveness.
Charleston may be divided along racial lines on other issues, but it's a very Christian city. So for the city's residents, black, white, whatever your background is, where the shooter might have intended it to be a divisive act, in fact, it had the opposite effect of bringing people together of all races.
Days later, President Obama delivers an impassioned eulogy for Pastor Clementa Pinckney.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
On January 10th, 2017, after being found guilty of 33 counts of hate crimes, Dylann Roof is sentenced to death in federal court.
These kinds of crimes tend to fracture our society along pre-existing fault lines of race and class, gender and religion, and so on.
Given the rise in hate crimes, law enforcement now faces the difficult task of anticipating the next Dylann Roof or the next Garden City conspiracy. But it's nearly impossible to identify the potential killers.
The truth is, hate crimes come from quote-unquote normal, everyday people. So there's really no way of saying we're going to profile or target a particular population.
You don't need to actually come face to face with people who are part of a white supremacist group or radicalized group at all. You just have to go online and you could find a KKK Twitter account. And from your own house, from your own couch, you could be reading violent propaganda.
There are enormous numbers of people, literally millions, who post incredibly ugly things on the internet.
I think it's important that we respond to individuals who are saying things or acting in ways that are belittling of minorities. Speak up and say, I don't agree with this. I think it's wrong. I think it's racist. Silence about these issues is consent and agreement.
The election only solidified the fear that many Americans agree with racist views, don't consider them equal partners in building this country. It's farther and deeper than they imagined.
You're starting to see things starting to build up, like people drawing swastikas outside of people's homes, people egging minorities, people yelling, go back to China, or go back to Africa, or go back to Mexico. And I mean, I've seen photos of black dummies being lynched in yards in Florida. It always starts kind of small, I think. And it's being normalized, which is the problem.
To think that people that I could be interacting with on a daily basis could be plotting something like this, it's troubling, not only troubling, but terrifying.
In times like this, yes, it's going to be very easy to just let it happen. And I think we've learned from history that if you just let these things happen, it does not end well. And you'd hope that America is better than that.